When I learned that this morning's service would deal with prison justice and ministry, I thought of a book of poetry I found earlier this year, Creativity in the Midst of Chaos, Poetry and Art from Texas Death Row. This poem, titled Tears, was written by Gerald Marshall, a young man sentenced to death in 2004. I believe he was 22, and still on death row today in Texas. He penned the book 999489 From Foster Care to Texas Death Row, and from my research is currently involved in appealing his conviction. Tears. My soul weeps for the fallen, the men lost to an execution table, for the tears shed for those unable to be free from this disease that murders the men around me. My soul weeps for the families of the victims who begets victims, the ones whose hearts bleed revenge, so much so they believe our execution lets the healing begin. My soul weeps for the kids who lose fathers and mothers to an unjust system, one that executes a parent, putting them at a disadvantage in an unjust world to become an encaged boy and girl. My soul weeps for me. Our souls weep for all those arrested, convicted, incarcerated, separated from their families and friends, whether justly or unjustly. We weep for the victims and their loved ones, for all those hurt by crime, for all those trapped in a system of injustice and harm. We light our chalice in the spirit of justice administered with an open and loving heart.
O truth unfolding, we are part of you. We are part of the mystery of life that surprises, confounds, hurts, and delights. Sometimes it feels like we are trying so hard to hang on and keep up, yet we know of no way past except through. We pray then for wisdom, for hands to hold in love, for moments that calm our breath in the midst of this season, as we look out on the gifts of the land and feel the heat of the lofted high sun. Let us lift our attention to all that is possible, discover the nourishment that offers strength, and seek comfort in the perennial cycle of life. May it be so, and amen.
A reading by Teresa Inés Soto. I imagine that anything that has ever mattered has begun with a question mark, a doubt that things had to continue being the same way that they have always been. I imagine that anything that has brought enduring beauty to the world began in a way that was very small, like a begonia seed, a scant 1/100th of an inch. I imagine that before there was a flame to light the way, there was friction, something slow and scraping like dread. I imagine before healing came, there was only pain, flaring like the rays of the sun, blocking out all the other imagining, telling the story that peace and wholeness was impossible. I imagine that before there was community, there was the thick darkness of imagining being alone forever, imagining that nothing else could ever come out of the dark. I imagine that imagining together is much greater in magnitude than imagining alone. The way things are doesn't want to change. It is the space and power of our imagination that will lead us into new futures. Come this way with me.
So for 6 weeks in the late winter of 2016, I walked through the doors of a 103-year-old brick building that's listed on the National Registry of Historic Places. It is located on a hill where you can just barely make out the St. Croix River. One morning, I stood in the parking lot as the sun rose. It was this neon orange ball that was emerging through this wispy layer of clouds. A hawk soared overhead. I was surrounded by this moment of utter beauty, and I felt so engulfed by peace and by curiosity of what the day would bring. I joined my colleagues in the lobby with its miniature hexagon tiles, its tall ceilings, dark wooden window trim, an ornate scene serving as a gateway into a world with metal detectors, thick doors, bars, keys, guards, and dogs. We were inside the walls of the Minnesota Correctional Facility in Stillwater, a level 4 close security state prison that houses more than 1,600 men convicted of felonies. And this is the same prison where just last week, Officer Joseph Gaum, age 45, was killed by Edward Muhammad Johnson, a 42-year-old inmate. And so I want to pause for a moment and just let you know how deeply I reflected on whether to change topics entirely, to write a new sermon about something else for my time here today with you. And I am mindful that what I am sharing may be triggering for some in the immediacy of the moment. Even though you're in Rochester and that was Stillwater, it's really not that far away, especially when you have correctional facilities right here in your neighborhood. And so above all else, I ask that you take care of yourself and your needs. You know what is best for you, and I completely understand that. And as you are able, I would like to extend an invitation for all of us to acknowledge the multiple, complex, even contradictory feelings we may be simultaneously holding about this situation or incarceration in general. Acknowledging perhaps our grief for Joseph Gaum, his family, friends, co-workers, and the communities that he is a part. Our concern for all of those working or housed in both Stillwater and Oak Park Heights, where Edward Johnson was transferred. And our thoughts for and about Johnson also. In the midst of so much suffering around this, I offer these words from Lama Surya Das. May all beings everywhere, with whom we are inseparably interconnected and who want and need the same as we do, may all be awakened, liberated, healed, fulfilled, and free. So, let us breathe and gently come back to Stillwater, the Stillwater I experienced 2 years ago, that ordinary, late winter day high up on the banks of the St. Croix River. There were 9 of us set to join a 6-week Restorative Justice 101 class as part of our Clinical Pastoral Education, or CPE, program. We weren't the teachers or the leaders. We were invited guests and witnesses from the free world. But just as importantly, we were there to sit with and among men who are incarcerated, to be part of a circle that changes questions and assumptions, to start the long internal and external process of putting right to wrongs and harm. Now, before I go any further, I want to make sure that we have and share a common understanding of what restorative justice is and what it is not. This is my mini, just a couple 100-word abbreviation of what I spent 6 weeks in a Restorative Justice 101 class learning myself. And the primary teacher for anyone doing this work is Howard Zier. He was one of the original developers of this concept, and he's a pioneer in bringing this practice to use in the United States, a practice that originates in Aboriginal and Indigenous people. The first thing to realize is that restorative justice is a compass. It is not a map. There's no one right way of doing it, no one right way of thinking about it, no single way of engaging in restorative justice. And it's also not a catch-all panacea. It does not necessarily replace our current legal processes. It does not necessarily replace all of our prisons, and it is not appropriate for all circumstances and for all people. It is, however, a powerful alternative to a system that tends to pile broken on top of broken on top of broken on top of broken. A system that isolates people, pits people against each other, tries to apply simplistic and inadequate labels. You're good, you're bad, you're a monster, you're a hero. There's so much more to who we are as people beyond these simple labels. What restorative justice invites us to ask is, how can we nurture transformation and not further perpetuate harm? How can we move toward a new sense of healthier relationships between people and communities? How can we transform our sense of identity from one of isolation to one of connections? It does not demand that we forgive, although that can come out of the process. What it does often offer instead is a sense of restitution. As Howard Zier writes, when someone who has caused harm makes an effort to make right that harm, even if only partially, it is a way of saying, I am taking responsibility and you are not to blame. And there is so much power and love and connection that comes out of that transformation. But most critically, restorative justice looks at the needs of all of the stakeholders, the needs of those harmed, of those causing harm, and of the community, a three-way triangle of stakeholders. Restorative justice says that a harm to one person is a harm to all of us. A harm to one is a harm to all. There is no such thing as isolated harm. It is part of a web of harm. Just like the seventh principle of Unitarian Universalism, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, restorative justice is relational. It says that we can't just throw someone away and pretend that they're not there and that they don't exist. It says we remain connected, even in the tough stuff. It says, if you are harmed, I am harmed too. If I cause harm, I am also harmed. Any and all harm harms the whole community. I do want to make it clear that the restorative justice framework always, always, always starts with those who have been victimized and their needs. I cannot state that more emphatically. This is of primary importance and one that takes great care. However, to truly promote reparation and healing for all, restorative justice helps us expand the circle of stakeholders to acknowledge the web of relationships and the vast reach of that harm. We can heal through the sharing and the receiving of stories, of all of our stories. As Chimamanda Adichie has said, stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. I want to know Joseph Gumb's story. I also want to know Edward Johnson's story too. Because one particular story of incarceration and harm is most immediate in our hearts and minds right now, I'd like to offer another. And this is a first-hand testimony shared in the Shakopee Women's Prison newsletter. Shakopee, as you may know, is our state's only women's correctional facility. It houses about 650 women across all levels of security needs. We also have, of course, federal women's facilities, but Shakopee is our only state women's facility. And so I've asked Anne to share this story, and I invite you to listen as openly as you can to this account, told in their words.
A Transition Story by TK. I'm serving a 5-year sentence for second-degree intentional murder. When I first arrived at Shakopee Women's Prison, I was bitter, broken, and full of pain. I was not accepting of my sentence, nor of being away from my life and children. I didn't know how to feel or share how I was feeling. My attitude and behaviors showed I was in a negative state of mind, and I suffered through many days in segregation for it. I was wanting something different for myself, and I knew I needed to change my thinking patterns, so I applied for IFI, Interchange Freedom Initiative, and entered the program. I only lasted 7 months because I allowed grief and loss to take over my state of being. I signed off. Again, I was allowing myself to become powerless over facing my pain and experiences. I took the easy way out. I was steadfast in my old habits, not taking hold of my past and dealing with it in a mature manner. I got my GED in 2.5 months, then moved on to transitions to college. I got my math and reading scores up high enough to enter the office support program. I graduated 8 months later with a specialized certificate. My progress was going at a steady pace. I was then called to the Changing Paths Treatment Program for a 12-month chemical dependency and behavior modification program. I had no idea what this program meant for me, but something inside me said, things are about to get real. I'm going to be honest with myself and you, I didn't like the program or the rules. I struggled to see the purpose behind most of the accountability papers we had to fill out. I also didn't agree with all the information that I had to relive over and over again. Here's the blessing in this. All that I went through, every contract and even a suspension, taught me that I was not humble enough. I was still fighting a war that only existed in my soul and my memory. 5.5 months into the program, I threw my hands up and said, I'm too grown to be carrying around old baggage. And at that moment, I stopped my negative thinking about my past and I got real. I worked the 12 steps and asked God to help me along the way. Treatment has calmed me down, helped me to look at the battles I was fighting, and ask if they were worth the fight. Making mature choices is a battle in itself daily, but when you have the ability to stop your negative thinking and redirect it in a positive manner, treatment then becomes a much better place to be. That is what treatment in Shakopee has taught me.
So when I hear a story such as TK's and others that are out there, when I hear the voices and learn about the lives of many, many people, I think about how all of us are really more than human beings. We are humans becoming. Humans becoming. This is a restoration of the complexity and the particularities of our humanity, who each of us is and was and may be still to come. It is a practice of relating that is anchored in respect for our inherent worth and dignity that belongs to every single person. When we change our questions, when we let go of fixed identities and labels and understandings of who we are, we can go below the surface and discover that there's always more there. There is always more to the story. There is always more to what we think we know and understand and comprehend. And when we can do that, when we can keep going deeper, we can recognize our ongoing and intertwined states of being and becoming. As Unitarian Universalists, we say revelation is never sealed. But let us not forget that that means within ourselves, across our communities, with others too. Each of us does and can experience revelation influenced by the myriad ways that all life is connected to all. None of us is permanently fixed in place. None of us can live without motion, movement, feelings, thoughts, memories, actions, reactions. Being human is living in the verbs. It's the being that leads to the becoming, even in our lowest and most disconnected moments. We are humans becoming, always striving to recognize, restore, and respect the full complexity of our own and each other's humanity. And we are humans being and becoming together, interconnected, interdependent, and interrelated, whether we like our relatives or not. As Buddhists might say, if we look carefully behind this bag of bones, we can realize the truth embodied in the phrase, I am that too. I am that too. After our last restorative justice circle at Stillwater, one of my chaplain colleagues shared how hard the weeks had been for her as a survivor of violence. I cannot speak for her and in no way want to suggest that anyone should or should not do or feel. In that moment, she chose to share with all of us in that circle, the free world people and the people who are incarcerated. She chose to share the realness of what she was experiencing, to make the darkness conscious, as Carl Jung has said, to offer a personal and in-the-moment reflection on the deep complexity and pain of healing and transformation, to share her needs out of respect for herself, but also respect for all who were in that circle gathered together. And because this practice of restoration is utterly relational, she and we asked the incarcerated men what we should tell people about them and our experience. And they said, and this is an exact quote, "Shine a light on who you sat next to. Let others know who you really see and be honest about it." There was some other words that they shared too, but they were swear words, so I won't use them here from the pulpit. But basically, say who they were. So here's who I saw. I saw men who are asking themselves and struggling to ask themselves, who am I right now? In this moment, right now. They were men who are on that very real and bumpy road to change, some of them entering that path willingly, and some of them there not because they wanted to be there and fighting it with every tooth and nail that they had. Men who, in many real and heartbreaking ways, were taking tiny steps forward for every 2, 3, and 4 giant steps back, some of their own making and some of the system of which they are a part. I saw men who are determined to claim their humanity, who are determined to say, I am still here whether you want me to be here or not. I am still alive and here on this planet. I saw men Some men who are trying to take responsibility for harm they have caused and to make things as right as is possible, knowing that you can only make things so right, but that does not help stop you from trying. When we each look behind this bag of bones, how can we not say, I am that too? More than we seem, more than we allow ourselves to be, sometimes doing our best, and sometimes doing our very worst, and oftentimes just trying to get by. We, all of us, are more than human beings. We are humans becoming in the complexity, pain, and beauty of all that life brings. So in your life, and in the lives of all others, may you know the mystery that breaks in every moment, the wisdom and truths and complexities that rise from every story, the transformation that is possible, the restoration that brings healing and peace. Let us go forth and discover the truths of our beings along the winding and ever-changing way. Blessed be, and amen. Let's come together as a community, shoulder to shoulder, hands to hands, hearts to hearts, whatever way that you feel comfortable in your connection. It is such a joy and honor and privilege for me to be here and share in this time with you. None of us is ever alone. Strangers, friends, lovers, family, we are always part of a bigger and broader community. Let us remember each other's touch. Let us remember each other's presence. In the hardships and in the joy, we are never alone. Blessings on your day, blessings on your life. Blessed be, and amen.